You don't need to have hours per day to invest in this. Self-care can come in small little pieces that can have, significant dividends in the end.
This is Mayo Clinic on Human Optimization, a podcast where we break down the science of human potential to help you understand how purpose-driven effort leads to high-level performance and long-term well-being. I'm Dr. Christopher Camp, Director of High Performance for the Minnesota Twins and a sports medicine surgeon with Mayo Clinic. Self-care is one of the most commonly used but poorly understood concepts today. For some people, it brings to mind indulgence, luxury, or performative wellness culture. For others, it feels selfish, soft, or unrealistic. However, self-care, when done properly, actually helps fuel us to be our best selves and will maximize our performance gains and achievement. Our expert guest with us today is Dr. Amy Oxentenko. She's the Vice Dean of Practice and Vice Chair of the People and Culture Committee at Mayo Clinic. She's an educator, researcher, leader, and avid distance runner who credits much of her success to intentional self-care practices. And the three big questions we have today with Dr. Oxentenko are, number one, what exactly is self-care and why do we need it? Question number two, what do we commonly get wrong when it comes to taking care of ourselves? And then in section three, our big question is, what practical, realistic strategies can we use to take care of ourselves amid our crazy, busy lives? Well, Amy, thank you so much for joining us today. Very excited to talk about this.
Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
This is one of my favorite types of topics because I feel like this is one that seems pretty straightforward and clear, but there's so much controversy around it. And I know there's a lot of people who don't like the concept of self-care because they feel that it's so indulgent or impossible to achieve. There's others who think that it's absolutely critical to their success. They can't get by without it. So we have very polarized views on this, which in my mind seems a little unnecessary. So hopefully we can bring all that together and sort of come up with some clear definitions that can be really helpful for folks.
I hope so. That'd be great.
All right. So let's start with that. So how do you define self-care in a way that's practical and useful for people?
I think about self-care as that investment in ourselves so that we can bring our best self to the other people that we're leading, serving, helping to take care of. It's that investment we're making in ourselves. So I think that's an important way to phrase it rather than, like you said, the indulgence side, which people often, misconstrue.
And I like that you said it's how we take care of ourselves. We invest in ourselves so that we can bring our best selves to others. And I think that second part of the definition is what so many people miss because they think, oh, this is just about me and making me feel good and taking care of myself. It's like, well, yes, you got to fill your cup up so that you can then help and contribute to other people.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I heard a definition once that I thought was so good. It's, self-care is giving the world the best of you, not what's left of you. And that's so true when you think about, obviously in medicine, oftentimes people do sometimes show up drained. And so I think rephrasing it about, we're coming to work to care for patients, to care for others. We want to put our best foot forward in doing so. It's really hard to do that when your battery's on empty, your fuel tank is on empty.
So let's talk about some of these misconceptions around it. So why is self-care often misunderstood as being either indulgence or laziness or unnecessary luxury?
I think part of it is just in the titling. Self, just by terminology, makes it seem like we're only focusing on ourselves and not others. Many people say self-care is not selfish. Again, it's the way that you have to think about how it's helping others, not just yourself. I think is the way, again, if it's reframed in that way, maybe we can get away from the idea that people have that self-care is, sitting at a spa all day and just, pampering yourself, which there's nothing wrong with that. That is, for some people, an important part of self-care, but that's just a very limited piece for many people.
You're right. I think one of the misconceptions is that it's basically just being comfortable, trying to make yourself comfortable. So what's the difference between self-care and just simple comfort-seeking behavior?
I think of self-care as kind of the long-term investment, whereas If you're taking care of yourself today and investing in those activities and structures that give you kind of that reset for the long haul, that's what it's all about. I think these other pieces of comfort seeking, in my mind, those might be the quick fixes. They feel really great in the moment. And again, we need some of those. But a lot of quick fixes don't really come to the root of what's causing perhaps the lack of self-care or the neglect of taking care of yourself. So I think it can be an and, but it needs to be balanced very carefully.
Mm-hmm.
It's no different in my mind than, we get a paycheck every 2 weeks. And part of that off the top is putting it in your investment portfolio. To me, that's what self-care is, investing in the long term. Yes, you have, whatever's left over, and you might go and buy some fun, toy or tool that you wanted. That's that quick fix. But that's not going to last you the longevity of your career, to bring sustained happiness, wellness, emotional support, et cetera. So I think, again, going back to the misconception about definition, so many people think of self-care as those quick fixes.
Mm-hmm. I love that analogy of the investment. So if you think about why we invest in retirement, it's so that we can hopefully make life a little simpler for our future self from a financial perspective.
Exactly.
Self-care, I haven't thought about it this way, but you're exactly right. It's sort of doing the same thing. It's like, okay, what are the things I can do now to make my day-to-day lives and activity easier on my future self?
Right.
All right. What if we don't take care of ourselves? What are some of maybe the obvious downsides people should be aware of, and then maybe some of the less well-known downsides?
It's a little bit tricky when I state this because, we think about burnout, and burnout is so prevalent. And I think it's also important, though, much of burnout that we see with people around us in healthcare is not because necessarily they haven't had appropriate self-care. It's often because of, other, whether institutional or systemic issues that are impacting their day-to-day experience in that workplace. But I think self-care gives you the tools, in my mind, to handle those tough experiences that we're going to have in healthcare, those tough days making challenging decisions. And so I think when I've looked across the spectrum at colleagues, at trainees in the various roles that I've had, if I see someone who has neglected their self-care, I feel like they're just less able to handle those day-to-day challenges. And again, that can then lead to burnout. Not that it's the cause of burnout, but I think it builds a resiliency sort of piece that's really important. Again, not that resiliency is the antidote for, impacting the systemic issues, but I do think it does help go in with a mindset of a can-do type of attitude, which I think is really important.
That's a great way to phrase that, because I think we do think about self-care as an antidote to burnout, one option for that. So I think a lot of people will say, well, I'm not burning out, so I don't need to do this.
Right.
But I actually think self-care, not only is it just for when you reach the dramatic, fall off the cliff, sort of emotional, mental, physical exhaustion, burnout phase of life.
Right.
But it's also wherever you are now, there are performance benefits.
Right.
So even if you're far away from burnout and you're feeling great, you're feeling engaged, there are still performance and productivity benefits to taking care of yourself as well. So can you talk a little bit about that, how self-care really supports both well-being and performance?
To me, it feels like synonymous with whether it's, your smart device that tells you your body battery is low, you're starting the day on low, or you're getting in your automobile, if you have a typical gasoline-containing automobile and you see your tank is already empty at the beginning of a busy drive or a long drive, how are you going to have that energy and that throughput to really bring your best self that day? Very different than I think if you have invested in yourself, your battery feels fully charged going into the day. I think there's just a different level of performance you will probably see from those individuals. And I think we've all seen that, right? With colleagues who've had a lot going on and they come to work and they look exhausted and you think, wow, it's going to be a hard 8 to 10 hour day with an exhausted body battery. So I think thinking about that performance, and oftentimes you're right, people may think, I'm doing fine. I don't need this. I can probably reflect on times of my career where I would have thought, I don't need attention to this. I'm not burnt out. But sometimes when we move beyond that and then we dedicate time to self-care and we look back and we think, wow, I probably could have performed so much better
struggling.
had I acknowledged what I really needed to invest in back then.
It's very easy for us to say, I'm not burned out. I think I'm doing okay.
Right.
Or I'm fine. Or I'm getting by. So the follow-up should be, is getting by how you want to live your life? Is that really what you want to do? So should you not be trying to actively run towards thriving and flourishing and performing at a high level? And I think self-care may be the thing that can help people turn that from a, I'm just trying to survive mentality to I'm actively pursuing greatness.
Absolutely.
I think can be really helpful. Earlier you mentioned, you mentioned spa days and that's it for some people, but not for everybody. So can you tell me how different self-care looks for different individuals?
Yeah, it is absolutely different for each one of us. We all have different things that spark our interest, fuel us, relax us, those sorts of things. Probably get 10 people in a room and we'd all have, if we had to list the top 3 things that we would, invest in our self-care, they might be vastly different. And some of that is the pace that each of us like to move at, right? A lot of people do meditation, journaling. Those are not things that I find relaxing to myself, to be honest, because of just the pace that I like to do things. So I like to do things that, burn off energy and burn off, steam and allow me to really think more clearly. So I think just understanding that your self-care menu might look very different than mine, and that's okay. That's absolutely okay. I don't think we should force our self-care priorities on someone else if it doesn't align with them. On the other hand, I think this is where role modeling can be really valuable. If someone sees, let's say, a colleague or a leader taking care of themselves, it suddenly gives them permission to do the same. And you've probably heard the saying, culture is caught, not taught. And I think with self-care, it's part of that as well. If people see what others are doing and they see how helpful that investment of, self-care is, then they may want to emulate that behavior and see, gosh, I feel like things are spiraling for me and I don't have good control over my day and I feel like I never have the time to charge my battery, and they see other people successfully doing it, then I think it opens up a spirit of inquiry, like, where do you find time to do that? How do you make the time? That's the million-dollar question that most people ask.
And I think the positive synergy there is very powerful. If you and I are on the same team and I see you taking care of yourself and then you're showing up at a higher level, that then inspires me and gives me permission to do the same. So I show up at a higher level, which then also benefits you because you're a member of the team as well. So when everybody on the team's performing at a higher level, we all win.
I've heard from a lot of individuals as they're coming up in their career ladder or their early career journey of, is it an or? Do I follow my career aspirations, or do I also enjoy these things I love to do outside of the work? And that should be an and. And I think they're more likely to be successful in their career pursuits if they find that ability to do both and not have to feel like they're sacrificing a piece of them.
So I think a lot of this really comes down to self-awareness and sort of figuring out, okay, what are your goals? Are you somebody who wants to achieve and perform and also be well? That's possible. You need to be aware of that. You need to make that declarative statement. This is what I'm seeking. And then you need to intentionally figure out how you're going to do it. But that's going to be different for everybody. I know some of the stuff that you do for self-care, and that sounds like punishment to me. And so, but that's okay. That works for you, right?
Exactly.
And so, but that also gets to this notion of this being, it's too luxurious or it's too soft or it's too indulgent. I think self-care actually sometimes is hard because sometimes self-care is doing the difficult thing. It's going to bed early when you want to sit and scroll on your phone, or it's deciding, hey, I'm going to fix this broken relationship, or I'm going to go have this difficult conversation with somebody, or I'm going to set this boundary. So it's not always easy. In fact, I think some of the best self-care is actually quite challenging and quite difficult to do.
I agree.
So let's jump into our second section here where we're going to talk about how we commonly mess this up and where we often get it wrong. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about you. So
Mhm.
you're obviously hard charging,
Mhm.
successful, striver, accomplished person. Have you always had a good handle on this taking care of yourself philosophy, or did you learn some of this the hard way?
I mean, I think probably many of us have learned it the hard way. I remember my earlier career self when I was first coming on faculty. My husband and I had 3 young kids, age 3.5 and under. He's also a physician. At the time, he worked out of town. So I was juggling all of the childcare drop off, pickup. And it was, just intensely busy. I do think in hindsight that created an efficiency system in me that I think has been beneficial long term. But I think back to those days and I really feel like there was a lot of my self-care that was sacrificed,
Mhm.
and part of that was because of priorities that I made. As my kids were growing up, I didn't want them to see me working on a talk at home or a paper, so I saved all of that for after they went to bed, which meant very late hours
Right.
and burning the midnight oil, sacrificing on sleep, and at the time I thought, "Oh, I'm fine. I'm going to work every day and I am still getting my work done." When I look back, I think, "How in the world did I do that?" To be
Mhm.
honest. And again, it's the time, the moment, you have to juggle those things as you do, but I think it really now looking back and as I meet with, junior colleagues who are in very similar situations, I don't have an easy answer for them. It's not
Mhm.
like here's a switch you just need to flip and everything will
Right.
suddenly get better. But I think, when I look back, I think, well, maybe I should have adjusted the number of things that I had on my plate. Maybe if I could have dialed that down for a little bit of time, could I have carved out a little bit more time to care for self that would have made the days a little bit more manageable? Possibly. I have always gone through life of kind of a no regret sort of thing. So I don't look back saying I would
Mhm.
necessarily change anything, but I think I would have probably just come to work probably more fueled and energized and ready to tackle the day, you know, in a different sort of space. Had someone told me, maybe say no to this and prioritize this for yourself. Again, I think it goes back to that early conversation we had that almost felt selfish to me, just because I felt like, you're told to be successful in your career and really invest in that space. So I think it honestly, it's probably not been until the last, 7, 10 years or so that maybe that early efficiency of the really busy schedule
Yeah.
now has paid off. My kids are older, they're out of the house. Suddenly I'm like, wow, I have all this
All this
time.
bandwidth. Yep.
And so again, I think cultivating those interests and those relationships with others early on, now that you have some more of the time and the space to do that
Mhm.
is really, really important as we think about what we're looking to do in the latter part of our career.
Mhm.
So
So I think there's a few things in there, and you're right. Like oftentimes our circumstances are often beyond our control, and a lot of folks may be in a position where they just think, "Listen, I've got so much going
right.
on, I can't do this. I just don't have the time for it." We'll talk about that in a little bit, but
Hmm.
I would say everybody can do something.
Hmm.
Do the best you can with what you have
Right.
where you are.
Right.
And you may not be able to be perfect at it, but you can almost certainly improve and at least fix your mindset around it. So that's one.
Right.
A second is I agree. Like we've all learned from doing this the wrong way for
Right.
a period of time. So if you're somebody who's sitting there and you're really struggling with this, don't beat yourself up.
Right.
There are lessons to be learned in the mistakes. So give yourself some grace to get
100%.
through it. And there are phases of life where at times it's going to be harder, at times it's going to be better.
Hmm.
But there's almost always something we can do to improve it. We've talked about a few misconceptions already, but I'd like to hear any other common misconceptions you see people have about self care.
I think one is that people maybe are worried that people will perceive them in a different way. Again, maybe having priorities that don't align with maybe the person that they're leading, under or those sorts of things. So I think sometimes there's a concern about perception and being open and transparent about those things that you're doing for your self-care. I think probably another misconception people may have is they view it as such a huge investment in time. Like if I'm going to do self care, I need hours a day for this. And really, self care can come in small little pieces. And again, those small pieces of investment of time will build up. So you don't need to have hours per day to invest in this. These can be small things that can have, significant dividends in the end. So I think addressing some of those issues. When I'm in panel discussions with, largely a lot of women in medicine who will struggle with some of this early on when they have young children, and young fathers do as well, I'm sure, is, how to fit that in. And then we'll probably get to this, how to overcome that guilt when you have so many other responsibilities. And somehow there's this concern and misconception that you're neglecting something else in order to focus on your own self-care.
So guilt was actually where I wanted to go next. So you set that up perfectly. And I think that there's so much guilt around this for people. And I kind of understand it, but I don't. I think that people feel guilty because they think they're doing too much for themselves. But I think if you can flip that switch and recognize that, wait a minute, I'm taking care of myself so that I can then invest in others.
Right.
Ultimately, this is a gift you're giving back to the world. It's not just about you. But I really think guilt is a huge limiter for so many of us.
Agree.
Yeah.
Agree.
Okay. And in addition to guilt, I think there's often people who think that they have to earn their self-care. And so I see that done in a couple of ways. Sometimes people will say, well, if I'll do this really challenging and hard or difficult thing, then I'll allow myself 15 minutes to take care of myself. So they're almost trying to barter with themselves. What are the potential pitfalls in that approach?
I mean, you may never get to that point where you have time to take the self-care, right? I mean, that whatever that behemoth thing that you're taking on and hopefully rewarding yourself at the end, that big project up front may just continue to grow and fill that space. So I always tell people to flip that narrative. How can you do that investment of yourself up front? Because then you're going to be more equipped to tackle that big project. So I think flipping that script, I think, is important. And many people, again, have to get over the guilt of that, feeling like this has to come as the reward at the end rather than the investment at the beginning. And so I think that's a really important concept for people when they're trying to figure out how to fit this in their day.
One of the things I struggle with, and I think a lot of others do as well, is that I think we often think just because an activity is low energy that it helps with recovery for us. But I think that's not always the case. So what happens when people confuse sort of numbing, distraction, or indulgence with actual self-care?
I think let's say go back, 6 years ago during the pandemic, there were a lot of individuals who found comfort from social media because we were so disconnected from each other when we were isolated, and they felt that connectedness, which I think was helpful, which over time has changed. And now you hear how spending time scrolling on any social media platform, while there may be these quick little euphoric fixes, I think it is then perhaps negatively impacted by the equal balance of the contrary. To me, this is almost like dessert. We would love to have dessert at every meal, right? But that's probably not healthy for us. It's probably not well advised. Just like doing too much of the, TV series binge watching or social media or these sorts of things, they may feel like they're giving us joy in that moment. But then when you look back after, wow, how much time did I spend on that thing? And what have I really gotten out of it? I think is just an important perspective. And can you say no to things once they have somewhat taken over your life? That's the piece that's really important and prevented you from doing the things that are really essential to getting by.
And I think some of these activities afterwards, we often realize that, and then we feel guilty. Oh,
Right.
I just wasted 3 hours or 6 hours or however much time.
Right.
So then you're sort of in this guilt shame spiral. So then because of the guilt, you feel like, well, I've wasted that time. I can't take care of myself. I've got to go do something productive. So then you do something that is,
Right.
So now you've done multiple things that are not helpful for your self-care. So you're putting yourself in a worse position
Right.
To start with.
And then you think, well, self-care is not helpful because I didn't get anywhere.
Right.
But it's really categorizing
You weren't doing
what
the right
was self-
thing.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
All right. Are there certain types of people or personalities that really struggle with this more than others?
I feel like young parents in general struggle with this, and it comes back to that guilt of any time that they're investing in themselves is time away from their children, and there's a guilt that's really hard for them to get over, and I've lived that, so I completely appreciate that. I think other people who are just not efficient with their time, they can struggle, right? They're spending all of their time in their in-basket and managing these sorts of things that they feel like they can never dig out to create that time. So I think that can be a challenge. And then I think really those high driving individuals who, like we talked about, are always feeling that they need to be working on something career related, and they're always looking for that next sort of milestone in their career. I wonder if they have a hard time identifying self-care just because, again, maybe that's not their priority in that moment. And again, that's their priority, but I've seen individuals like that, not pace themselves. And then they get to a certain point of their career and, they just either they burn out or they feel like I don't have those relationships and those other things to fall back on that really bring me joy.
That's a great list. And I've also seen it, I think, in people who their job or profession has them in any sort of service industry or giving, So
Right.
if you're somebody whose primary role is to take care of others, teachers, nurses, dentists, anybody, mechanics, whatever, if you're providing service to others, oftentimes you get so focused on others, you think that you're not worthy. So
Right.
I think
That's a
those
great
that are
point.
predominantly service oriented
Mhm.
and also folks who may struggle with self-worth
Right.
as well.
That's true.
Can self-care be overdone? So can we get too much of a good thing?
Oh, I absolutely think that's possible. Again, if it is getting in the way of you getting done your daily work-related tasks that are part of your job description or job expectations, or you're neglecting your relationships, either in your family, friends, because you're spending so much time doing some isolated activity that takes you away from those things that really, you know, are your, again, day-to-day kind of expectations and requirement, that can be a bad thing. So I think having the insight to be able to say, is this impacting my ability to get things done? And then also having an openness, by and from those people around you. If they say, hey, I think, you're spending a lot of time on this, they're probably not saying that unless they really see how it's perhaps negatively impacting. So I think it can be overdone. And that's just, inventorying. Am I getting done what I have agreed and taken on? And if not, where do I need to reset things? And maybe it's because your plate is too full and that's why. And maybe it's because you need to readjust there. Maybe you're not doing too much self-care, but you've taken on too many other things.
As you think about this
Mhm.
in your life, do you have kind of a model or framework that can kind of
Mhm.
help us understand what are the components of self-care? What are the different areas and things that I need to be thinking about?
Yeah, so when I've spoken on this topic in various settings, I put up this analogy and this visual that people should think about. Think about your dinner plate. Your dinner plate, every one of us has a different plate, different size, different depth. And so we can't compare across. I can't look at your plate and say, you have so much more on your plate. How come I can't handle that? So we all have differing plates. So not to be victim to that comparison trap. But that plate is really what is required of you for your work responsibilities and your family responsibilities. And so you can control in a way how full that plate is, right? How many things you're saying additionally yes to at work that maybe you should have said no to. And that plate is eventually going to get high enough or full enough that if you keep saying yes, things will either, fall off that plate, meaning the quality of what you're doing is going to suffer, or, you know, given both work and family exist on that plate, something is going to be sacrificed. So that's what you need to be able to manage every day. Then there's the water glass. I watch a lot of survival type of shows. You can't exist, after 24 hours without water. So these are your essentials. These are the things that without them, you can't even come close to even addressing the things that are on that dinner plate. So these things in the water glass may be different for each one of us, right? For many people, it will be time with family. It will be taking care of their health, their exercise. For some people, it's faith. These are the things that are going to equip them to manage, the day-to-day sort of expectations and responsibilities. And so I think that's where self-care fits into that water glass, because again, without it, it's going to be really hard to manage those day-to-day things. And then earlier I mentioned the dessert plate. Again, the dessert plate, we'd all love it. Dessert is amazing. We'd love it at every meal. But if we have too much of it, it's going to impact, again, how we can address the things on our plate. So the dessert plate in my mind are, you know, the social media platforms, they can give you, like you said, that euphoria in a quick sense, but not a sustainability. This is where TV watching, all of these things, again, not that they're bad, but you have to be able to modulate them because without it, the other two things are going to be disrupted. So that's always sort of the position that I think about. As I have an opportunity, I look, what's on my plate? What can this fit on my plate? And if not, what needs to move off my plate before I can do that? If I do this, then, what's going to happen with that water glass? Is my water glass getting empty because I haven't had the time because of everything I've taken on to be able to address self-care and the things that are most important to me? So I think that can help with a framework that it keeps things in 3 different buckets to be able to figure out which one needs to go down, which one needs to come up, where do I need to find some additional balance?
Oh, that's great. I like that analogy. And I think you've said that very well. And hopefully that'll hit home for everybody. I like that you added the dessert plate in there because you're telling people you don't have to eliminate all of this stuff. It's okay. Just do it with intention.
Right.
Do it with moderation. And also know what works for you. The dessert you like may be a little different than the one that I like, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay.
Absolutely.
So now using that framework, how do I know where to start? So let's say I'm somebody who's really never thought about this at all. I'm starting from scratch. Where do I go? What's step number 1?
You first have to identify what for you are those really important high priorities in your life? And again, there's no judgment, but we all may have those priorities may be different. For many people, it's going to be their family, and hopefully their own health and wellness, all those sorts of things. But those are, I think, that inventory of what are your priorities and making sure that you have something in place to protect and address and preserve those relationships, those priorities. I think then you think about what are all of the tasks and responsibilities that you have taken on? Some it's not like you can necessarily, your family is your family, right? So
can't get out of that one.
You have those expectations and responsibilities. I think it's more so in the activities that you add on for your family or the activities that you add on work that are not necessarily part of your true, I don't want to say job description, right? There are those, hey, you want to write this book chapter. Hey, do you want to give this additional talk? All those extra things that, again, you just have to have a way to have a yes, no sort of algorithm in your head of how you're going to weigh those opportunities that come your way to make sure that you maintain that balance. So I think those are the 2 areas that I would get started. And then, again, you can add in those extra things as you feel like it's not disrupting that balance. That's really important. And then once you have found that balance, you can certainly experiment, try some new things, but knowing that anything else you add, something else may need to either come off or give way. And maybe that's okay. Maybe you're at a point in time in your career where you have that additional flexibility, or you can start to say no to more things because there's junior faculty that are eager for those responsibilities. And so that's a great way to open up some space to do other things.
And I think that's an important point at the end because sometimes self-care is adding the things you need to do to take care of yourself. But oftentimes it is subtracting the things you're doing that are detrimental as well. So in reality, oftentimes the subtraction is much more powerful than the addition because then we actually get some time back and we're removing something that's stealing our joy and our flourishing, which I think can be really, really powerful.
Well, and maybe just to piggyback on that, what's important as we think about as we get towards the end of our careers and in the retirement phase, if we haven't made these self-care investments of relationships and activities that we enjoy outside of work, what's going to sustain us in those later years, right? So developing those relationships and not having those be the things that you peel off or sacrifice early on, those things will pay it forward later on when you've developed and invested in others, invested in those relationships, invested in those hobbies that you really enjoy that will sustain you beyond, age 65, et cetera.
Can you tell us for yourself, somebody who's super, super busy and got a lot going on, what are some of the things you have found that have been the most effective in your self-care? Because you're somebody who doesn't have a lot of spare time, but you have found ways to manage this. So what types of things work for you?
I think the most important thing is just scheduling in my schedule. And it's not always structured like that, but there's certain times of the year, for example, starting in a few weeks, I'm going to start my next marathon training cycle with my daughter. And if I don't have time at, it might be 5 in the morning scheduled to do my daily runs, they may not happen because the day sometimes gets filled with evening activities and other things. So I think scheduling things in is really important if they're a priority for you, but also being open to the in the moment sort of opportunities as well. So if I have a busy week where, gosh, I'm finding a hard time to schedule it in, I will just make sure that I have that adaptability if I find a moment of time where I can take advantage of something to do some small amount of self-care, having those things at the ready, whether it's running, whether it's reading, whether it's grabbing coffee with a colleague. Some of those things are really important.
And two things I want to call out. One of the things you mentioned is you're running a marathon and you're doing it with your daughter too, which I think you're already, the running is, I know, a thing for you that's part of your self-care, but then doing it with somebody who you actually enjoy and want to pour into, I think is, because now you're getting the exercise you want, it's helping with your self-care and forming that genuine social connection, so doing it with others, I think, is incredibly powerful and often overlooked.
Right. And I think, we talked early on about the guilt. And, I think about the earlier years when my kids were younger and I would go out on a run and feel guilty that I'm neglecting them. I'm leaving them with my husband to manage these 3 small kids. But now seeing as my daughter has gotten older and she's in college and, wants to run more with me and wants to do races with me, it has allowed me to look back to say, well, those runs that I had away from the house obviously hasn't negatively impacted her. Perhaps maybe it's inspired her of how she can incorporate those things in her career going on and not have to sacrifice those. So I think that has been helpful to remove that guilt that I probably had in excess at an earlier phase of my career.
These kids are always watching.
They're always watching.
And this gets back earlier, what you mentioned, even at work, how when you take care of yourself, you can inspire others to do it. That happens at home with your children, right? They're going to notice that. Another thing I want to pull out of your last answer was you talked about you don't always have these huge chunks of time. You're not going to get a 4-hour block where you can go do something extravagant. So sometimes it comes down to these tiny little things that can be really restorative.
Right.
And recently, a lot of people have talked about exercise snacks. How if you don't have time to get to the gym, can you just 5 minutes, 2 minutes, whatever, can be really helpful just to move your body, get your heart rate up, et cetera. I like the term self-care snacks. Now, based on what you said, sometimes all you need is just a minute, 2 minutes, just look away from the computer or monitor, close your eyes, take some deep breaths, whatever. But sometimes just doing 2 to 3 minutes probably can be really helpful and impactful.
Absolutely. Yeah. When my kids were at that age where, we all have that phase where we're, the Uber parent, meaning Uber, we're driving them everywhere to all of their activities. And again, feeling like, when can I have my time to do self-care? I'm sitting at baseball games or track meets. And so I would just have the back of my car equipped with things so I could get that self-care snack, right? I'd throw on some running shoes and run around the baseball, fields for whatever length of time until practice was over. So looking for those opportunities and being prepared for them, I think is really helpful.
And in addition to self-care, what role do sleep, movement, nutrition, and all of those sort of things play in sort of a foundation? Because we talk a lot on here about how all of these different pillars of human performance really overlap with one another, and I think this is another example. What are your thoughts?
I think, to be honest, that has been where it's probably so obvious to everyone else, but I think in the last 5 years or so, this has been the most enlightening for me. And it's almost like I had this aha moment, which I wish I would have had many years ago.
Don't we all?
But I think it was when I started training for my first marathon and I was turning 50. And I thought, in order to do this with all of the chaos I have going on in my professional and society life, traveling a lot, I realized that, as we get older, we're more injury prone. And so just doing a lot of reading, thinking I need to get adequate sleep so that I'm less likely to injure. And I'm not going to be able to get up and do a long run the next day if I'm on fumes. And also how nutrition, many times we've gone through our days in the past of fueling on coffee all day, which is probably not healthy, right? That's not going to allow me to perform my best. So that has become, I think, what has attracted me so much to this sort of lifestyle of continuing whatever level of training it is, because it has made me much more disciplined about going to bed early. I'm in bed by 9:30 every night because I have to get up early the next day. It makes me very mindful about what have I filled my body with for the day, and is it anything that's going to be helpful for next day's performance? I don't think I really thought about those things early on, but now that I see and feel the impacts of those, I mean, I just come to work far more energized than I did even 10 years ago when those things were not top of mind. So now it has totally changed from my earlier career where sleep was an afterthought. Now for me, sleep is a priority because I see how much more I'm coming to work with every day than I did in the past.
Yeah, great. I think we really need to think of ourselves in this sort of holistic, well-rounded
Right.
picture. And even if your goal is just achievement and performance, you're going to do better if you're sleeping, if you're moving, and
Right.
if you're eating good food and taking care of yourself. So really all of this is founded. No matter what your goals
Right.
are, all of these things are foundational.
You're
and
just cognitively
critical.
sharper, I
Yeah.
think. It's not just physically, more apt, but you're just cognitively sharper with those things
Yeah.
having been attended to.
Okay. Last question here for you. Is it ever okay to intentionally neglect self-care? We talked about this earlier where we have some busy times in our lives and sometimes it's more challenging. Is it ever okay to just say, you know what, right now, I'm just not going there. Can't do it. Won't do it.
That's a really tricky question. I think it depends on the length of time you're looking for that, turning away from self-care. Like you said, people may have a busy week of travel and it may be more challenging to do the things that they have routinely done for their self-care. So I think if you have a short pause, as long as there's an end to that period of time where you can say, gosh, I have 3 really busy days or I have 2 weeks of busy travel, I'm going to have to dial things down a little bit. But knowing at the end of that, I'm going to get back to the structure. And as long as you have somewhat of the discipline to be able to do that and not get on this path that then becomes a spiral where you're neglecting self-care all around. So I think you just have to be careful with that because once you start to neglect it, I think it's easier then to neglect it more and to get away from healthy habits that maybe you started to develop.
I like how you said that. So maybe dial it down if you have to.
Right.
But hopefully only for a defined period of time.
Right.
And I would say dial it down, but don't turn it off.
Correct.
So even find ways to do those little self-care snacks along the way.
Absolutely.
People are life is hard and life is challenging and tragedy strikes. And there are times where you think, oh my goodness, I have to take care of my loved one who's got this awful thing or whatever. Like you can do that, but still, find ways to say, okay, I'm going to do this for a period of time. And then I'm going to help get myself back on track because I won't be the best caregiver to them and the rest of the world unless I
Absolutely.
do that. Wonderful. Okay. So I've been taking notes here as we've been talking, and I'd love to take a minute to kind of run through those if I can,
Yeah,
and then I'll
absolutely.
give you the last word. So we started off with your definition of self-care, which I love. It has 2 parts. It's an investment in ourselves so that we can bring our best selves to others. And I think that's one of the big problems that people miss the second half of that definition, bringing our best selves to others. And I also like what you said that we should give the world what is best of you, not what is left of you. So we really need to try to make ourselves as good as we can. So what we're giving to the world is high quality. Self-care is a long-term investment. It's not a quick hit or a quick comfort seeking. Some of the downsides of not investing in your self-care, higher rates of burnout, lower engagement, lower productivity, poor relationships, and decreased performance. And we talked about sometimes it's tempting to say, I'm doing okay, or I'm getting by, or I'm hanging in there. But then you have to ask yourself, is that really what you want, or do you want more out of life than that? You also mentioned the point that people will emulate your good behavior. So if you take care of yourself, others will see that. Your performance is going to go up. They're going to watch what you're doing, and then that gives them permission to do the same. Their performance will go up. That goes for coworkers and your children at home.
That's right.
Some common misconceptions around self-care are that people will judge you if you do it. You think it has to be some huge, massive effort, or you feel guilty for doing it, or you think that you have to earn your self-care. And then we also often think that things that are low energy equal recovery, which is not always the case. We all struggle with this, but some people who are particularly at risk are young parents who are at risk for a lot of different things, people who are inefficient with their time, those who have low self-worth, or those who are in service-oriented careers. You gave us a great framework in the 3rd section where you talked about the plate, all the things we have on our plate, but also the essentials in our water cup, the fun stuff we have on our dessert plate. So be very thoughtful, and everybody's plate can look very differently, and that's okay. And then you gave some great tips at the end on how you do this if you're super busy. So add it into your schedule, put it on your calendar, do it with others so you get some genuine social connection. That's sort of a 2-for-1 deal. Put priorities in your day when you have the most control over your day. You have to be adaptable because things change. We talked about doing little micro snacks of self-care. And remember, it's often about subtraction. So it's not always adding new things in. Sometimes it's taking away things. That can be really helpful. And then lastly, it is highly personalized, which I think is good news and bad news. The bad news is there is no one right way to do it. It's different for everybody. But the good news is you don't have to do what everybody else is doing. You figure out what works for you. Make sure you know what's filling your cup up so then you can go fill up the cups of others. So, Amy, I'll leave it to you for the last one. So what's the most important thing you want people to take away from our discussion today?
I think the most important thing, like we mentioned, number one, self-care is not selfish. And number two, it's an investment in their future state. So I think thinking about those two things and that they don't have to earn self-care. They really deserve and investing in their own self-care is really important.
Okay, so we always like to end every episode with a challenge or a call to action. And so in this one, I think it's helpful to think about it in those different categories of self-care that we listed. So we talked about physical, mental, emotional, relational, and spiritual being the 5 categories. In order to help you with this challenge, I'm going to list off some examples in each of those that can be potential targets for our audience. So for each of those categories, I'm going to give you options, 3 things you could potentially add or 3 things you could potentially eliminate. So we'll run through this list, and then our challenge at the end is going to be for you to pick one of these 5 categories that you want to focus on, and then pick one thing that you want to either add or eliminate. Don't try to do it all at once. But here are some options to get you thinking, and you can also come up with things on your own. In the physical self-care category, 3 potential things you could add. Take a 10-minute walk after meals, or schedule routine, medical, dental, or eye care. The third, prep one healthy snack or meal option. All right, now 3 things you could eliminate. Stop late night scrolling that steals your sleep. Number 2, stop drinking excessive sugary drinks or alcohol. Number 3, stop keeping only ultra-processed snacks available. All right, now for mental self-care. 3 things you could consider adding. Number 1, write down your top 3 priorities for the day. Number 2, turn off non-essential phone notifications. Number 3, set boundaries around news consumption. 3 potential things you could eliminate. Number 1, stop beginning your day by reacting to email or social media. Number 2, stop trying to remember everything mentally. Instead, write it down. Or number 3, stop overthinking your entire future all at once. Now, in the emotional self-care category, 3 potential things you could add. Number 1, practice slow breathing for 1 to 2 minutes every day. Number 2, ask yourself, what is this emotion trying to tell me? So don't be a judge, be a scientist. Number 3, celebrate one small win each day. All right, 3 potential things you could eliminate. Number 1, stop pretending you're fine when you're really not. Number 2, stop judging yourself for having normal emotions. Number 3, stop only noticing the things that went wrong. Now for relational self-care. 3 things you could consider adding. Number 1, send one encouraging text to somebody today. Number 2, spend time with people who energize and challenge you. Number 3, set boundaries with toxic or chronically negative interactions and people in your life. All right, 3 potential things you could remove. Stop half listening while distracted. Number 2, stop overcommitting so that you don't disappoint others. And number 3, stop keeping all of your conversations at surface level. And lastly, for spiritual self-care, 3 things you could consider adding. Number 1, spend 5 minutes in prayer, meditation, or quiet reflection each day. Number 2, serve somebody else without expecting any recognition in return. Number 3, create a Sabbath-like rhythm of scheduled rest for yourself. 3 potential things you could eliminate. Number 1, stop rushing through life without ever pausing. Number 2, stop taking your blessings for granted. And then number 3, stop trying to grow spiritually completely on your own. Do it with friends, do it with community. So there's a list of potential things you can add or potential things you can eliminate across the 5 categories. Our challenge for you to remember is going to be pick one of those 5 categories, and then in that category, just choose one of the things you want to add or one thing you want to eliminate. Keep it simple, start small, and then once you nail that, you can add on afterwards.
That's right.
Amy,
Sounds
thank
great.
you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
If you like this episode, please share it with a friend and leave us a review on your podcast app. It really helps others find the show. Got feedback, a question, or a topic idea? Email us at optimize@mayo.edu or leave us a voicemail at 507-538-6272. We might even feature your voice on the show. For more human optimization episodes and resources, check us out online at ce.mayo.edu/optimize. Remember, long-term well-being starts with the habits you build today. Live intentionally, perform exceptionally. I'm Dr. Christopher Camp. Thanks for listening.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as medical or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified healthcare provider for any medical questions. The appearance of any guest does not imply an endorsement of them, their employer, or any entity they represent. The views and opinions are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of Mayo Clinic. Reference to any product, service, or entity does not constitute an endorsement of or recommendation by Mayo Clinic.